something between Omaha Beach and the Bay of Pigs. This is how Momo Hattori would later describe her shift at Lou's Burger and Fry on the night of July 7th. She gave that description to a county judge and a 12-man jury, but that's a story for another time. For now, let's focus on the night itself. Momo was standing behind a busy stove, drowning in tickets. The afternoon sun was nestled ever so comfortably in the sky, nestled in just the right way that it stared straight through the windows and amplified the kitchen's heat. Mickey Atkins was alone in the front line, taking orders and making milkshakes. He once spent 15 minutes telling a man that they did not have a dairy-free ice cream. "Maybe you'd like to try a churro, or an apple pie," Mickey asked in vain. But of course, the lactose-intolerant man had no interest in such things, and every moment he spent in protest, the line behind him grew longer and more unwieldy. Jimena Gallo was working the fry corner, burning her hands against the hot metal fryers and her arms and face against the molten canola oil. She shoveled heaping handfuls of french fries and tater tots, tossed handfuls of onion rings and chicken nuggets. She fried corn dogs by the dozen. And when Mickey Atkins eventually convinced that man at the register to order a churro, she fried that too. When the summer sun dipped just below the horizon and the neon signs were switched off, Momo Hattori took a step away from the burning stovetop. She sighed deeply from the center of her chest and walked outside. It was a pleasant evening. It really was. And in the same way that the waves were certainly beautiful on Omaha Beach or off the coast of Cuba, the clouds above the parking lot were dense and full of color. She stood on top of an upside-down bucket and smoked as she enjoyed the view. But of course, as a 17-year-old kid in the land of enchantment circa 1997, smoking was a criminal offense. Not that it matters, since Momo preferred weed above tobacco, which would have been a felony regardless of her age. She took a few deep breaths, then dampened the flame and saved the rest of it for later. Went back inside and started scraping the stovetop clean. Now, I must admit that I've been a little dishonest about the events of that earlier shift. In describing the restaurant with not but a single employee assigned to each station, stovetop, frontline, and fry corner, I had neglected to mention the fourth employee present throughout the night. That, of course, was Elliot Birdman, the general manager and son of Lou Birdman, namesake of Lou's Burger and Fry. Elliot, the prodigal son, was 6'5" and ginger, ugly as a mule. Sometimes the same orthodontic quirks that gave him a lisp as a child would return in his early adulthood, especially when he raised his voice. Only now, instead of a lisp, they produced a soft, high-pitched whistle as the air moved between his teeth. Momo was about to hear that whistle. "Hey, Momo, why'd you go outside?" Momo ignored the question at first and just kept scrubbing, but Elliot eventually tapped her on the shoulder and insisted. "Why did you go outside?" Momo rolled her eyes and turned to face the manager. "Smoke break. We're supposed to be closing. Getting out of here as quickly as we can." "Has there ever been a problem with the grill after I've cleaned it?" Elliot hesitated for a second, but shook his head. "Well, then why does it matter if I take a smoke break beforehand?" Momo tried to get back to work, but Elliot grabbed her by the shoulder before she could turn around. "The problem isn't the end result, it's the time. Wouldn't you rather go home early?" The question must have been rhetorical because he answered on her behalf. "Of course you would. Well, then why are you wasting time with smoke breaks?" "Elliot, I've been here since 8 in the morning. I'm entitled to 5 minutes before I clean my grill." "You're not entitled to anything. Plus, it's bad for morale. If you start taking breaks after we close, then pretty soon they'll all be taking breaks." "Good. I hope they do." "No, not good. We're paying you by the hour. Nearly $5 an hour, same as everyone else. If y'all start taking breaks, then we could be back to having a 2-hour close. And we can't afford to have a 2-hour close every night." If Elliot had been attracted to Momo, then he wouldn't have had a problem with her taking a smoke break at the end of a busy shift. In fact, he would have encouraged it. But Elliot was not attracted to Asians, least of all the Japanese. So Momo was treated like the men of the shift, overworked and undervalued. Mickey was all too familiar with the feeling. He had only worked at Lou's Burger and Fry for a little less than a week before he was expected to run the front line on his own. This meant taking orders, exchanging money, cleaning messes and wiping down tables, making ice cream cones and milkshakes, and running errands for the kitchen. From restocking styrofoam boxes to refilling bottles of ketchup and cutting fresh pickles. Once, a woman lost her lunch all over the soda machine and the entire section had to be properly sterilized. All of this happened, of course, in the middle of a busy shift, and Mickey had to do everything by himself. Luckily, days like that were relatively rare, but as mentioned before, today had been one of those days. And since this was only his second week on the job, he had made a good deal of mistakes, and Elliot was sure to let him know that they did not go unnoticed. Jimena Gallo suffered no such abuse from the manager. Again, this is because Elliot was attracted to her. Unlike Momo, whose foreign ethnicity was scorned in the mind of Elliot Birdman, Jimena's was fetishized. She was 15 years old. After the distraction of Elliot's management, the three teenagers tidied up the restaurant in a matter of minutes. They worked like a well-oiled machine, all three of them, but Mickey and Momo especially. Maybe that's to be expected, or maybe that comes as a surprise, considering they lived and worked and slept together. They share needles too, but that's beside the point. As the three managees busied themselves with all the actual work, their manager counted money at the till. He printed off a 2-foot-long receipt and stuffed it into a zipper-bound bag, alongside a fast stack of cash and a quarry of change. He tossed the little bag into a tiny iron safe. Momo glanced up from behind the stove as he did. Back at Momo's trailer house, she sat with Mickey and a couple of her other friends in the cramped little kitchen. They talked and drank and smoked until steam was pouring out from the windows. King Diamond was playing from a cassette in the other room. And as you might expect at the end of a stressful workday, the four young people mostly complained about their jobs. Dillian Jean bemoaned the long hours at an elder care facility on North Washington Avenue. Annie's boyfriend didn't say much of anything, but what he did say was at the expense of one of his coworkers. The coworker's name was Zane Hoffman, and the boyfriend's name was Will Barrow, but everybody called him Wheel. And of course, Mickey and Momo had plenty to complain about, and complain they did. But at the end of their whining, after a long moment's pause, Momo spoke with a certain determination in her eyes. She spoke of a way to get even. "They've got a safe, you know," she said suddenly. "Tiny little thing. I'll bet you whatever we could pick it up." Annie dismissed the idea before Momo had even finished her pitch, but Wheel was just as curious as he was skeptical. Mickey, it goes without saying, was more than on board. "And then what?" Wheel asked. "Mickey's stepdad has a blowtorch in the garage. We could crack the damn thing open." "They don't really keep that much in the safe, you know," Annie countered. "They only ever keep like $2,000 at any given time. If that." The difference between Mickey and Momo and the rest of their friends is that the rest of their friends had good jobs, so $2,000 wasn't nearly enough to risk a free ride in a cop car. Wheelbarrow agreed with his girlfriend. "Yeah, she's right though. I mean, what could you even get with $2,000 that'd be worth all the trouble?" Later that night, Mickey and Momo tossed a zipper-bound bag full of cash into the front seat of Lou Edelman's Camry. "We'd like a 1/4 pound of peanut butter crank," they said through the open window. Lou Edelman grinned in disbelief as he lifted the little bag off from the tattered car seat. How in the hell are these two idiots going to pay for a 1/4 pound? He thought to himself, then unzipped the little parcel. He counted its contents, then counted again. $2,314, plus whatever the loose change at the bottom of the bag accounted for. "Where'd you even get this?" Lou asked of the partly open glass. At first, the two delinquents were worried they'd have to actually break into the restaurant. After all, they were playing the parts of random criminals with no prior knowledge of the establishment, not that of disgruntled employees who knew exactly where the spare key was hidden. But as it turns out, Elliot Birdman had forgotten to lock the door before going home, and needless to say, this made things significantly easier. It also led to Elliot getting fired by his own parents, which was a nice reward on its own. Back at the battered Camry, Lou thought again about the exorbitant price and the requested product. He dug around his trunk, where a spare tire was supposed to be placed, but a felony's worth of narcotics was hidden instead. He measured a 1/4 pound and placed it into a Ziploc bag. He passed the light brown block of meth to the two young junkies, and their eyes dilated with joy. This was the most of anything that Lou had ever sold to either of them, and he was fairly certain they were going to get picked up because of it. He did his best to account for the inevitability. "Hey, if anyone asks you who your dealer is, just tell them some guy on Summit Street. You got it?" Roswell was full of dealers, but Summit Street was especially full. If Mickey or Momo had said Lou Edelman gave us our stash, then that would be the end of our aspiring entrepreneur. But if instead they said some guy on Summit Street, the cops would have nothing to work with. The best part is that it was technically true, little more than a lie of omission. So even these two idiots couldn't possibly screw that up. Climbing back into the tiny Nissan Sentra that the two of them co-owned, they couldn't even wait to get back to their trailer before having a taste of their newest investment. They loaded their pipe, they usually shared a pipe, and smoked before Momo pushed the car into gear and kicked off into the street. As she drove and as a jittering shiver made its way through her body, she found it difficult to keep her eyes on the road. They kept drifting to the ceiling. The entire interior of the car was covered in little doodles that Momo had drawn with a Sharpie. One was a monkey in a parka. Another was a cartoon sun with a long and spindly nose. There was an alien with 3 eyes and a willowy rabbit in a showgirl dress. She was smoking a cigar. It was a darling tapestry, and all the little doodles seemed to dance as Momo looked at them. But the majority of these charming characters were fated to be destroyed beyond recognition before the sun would rise in the morning. Mickey dangled his hand out the window and let it bob up and down in the wind. He envisioned it as an airplane, or a rocket, or a flying saucer. These visions were undefined in his altered state. He was just as likely to say, "Take me to your leader," as he was, "The eagle has landed." These quotes were essentially the same in that moment, even as one was taken from a human's lips and the other from a creature of a different world. "My little guys are dancing," Momo said from behind the wheel, but Mickey could not hear her over the sound of the space lasers he shot from his pinky. Mickey smoked another bowl on the drive, and they both had a little more when they got home. They were laying in bed now, the twin-size mattress that filled the majority of their tiny bedroom. The ceiling above them moved like a pool of water. Its surface was iridescent. Momo threw a Kennedy $50 at the ceiling to see if it would ripple like a liquid. It did. The longer that Momo stared at the glistening lake, the greater its definition. Occasionally, she'd feel little drops of rain that were successful in escaping the gravity spell above them. They'd fall through the sky and splash against her warm skin. They were cold to the touch. "Do you think they'll have lakes like this in Belgium?" Momo asked, suddenly breaking the silence. "Lakes like what?" Momo gestured to the pool of floating water. Mickey had been staring at the ceiling for just as long as Momo, but it wasn't until then that he noticed the iridescent ripples in the cool dripping rain. "Oh yeah. Yeah, I bet they do. What else do you think they'll have in Belgium?" Meth-addled teenagers always talked about leaving home, always talked about bigger and better things just beyond the horizon, even more so than sober teenagers, which, in America at least, were few and far between. Still are. But for whatever reason, in the southwestern quadrant of 1990s America, a popular daydream destination for these meth-addled teenagers was the beautiful land of Belgium, the crossroads of Europe. Mickey and Momo were no such exception to this rule. "Waffles," Mickey eventually said. This was his answer to Momo's earlier question, but maybe 5 minutes had already passed since it was first asked. "You want to get waffles?" Momo asked. "Yeah. Let's get waffles." They smoked more crank before they left and a little bit more in the Denny's parking lot. It took them 15 minutes to place their order, Belgian waffles with maple syrup, and almost just as long to count out the money they'd need to pay for it, $2.65. Now they were sitting in a booth and waiting. "Look at that," Mickey said as he gestured to the tiled floor. "The tiles are moving." "The tiles are moving," he said. At first they moved in straight geometric formations, moving along the walls and following the same lines that they had always been arranged in. But then a few of them began to pulsate and orbit the rest. One by one they started to dance like synchronized swimmers. Pretty soon the entire floor was dancing, all moving like a solar system with several rings of emancipated squares turning in unison. At the center of the system was a married couple orbiting around each other. "I think that's us," Momo said. "Those two squares dancing in the middle. I think that's you and me." And then the squares had faces, simple little faces, nearly hidden by the wear and tear of the linoleum floor. And sure enough, the four-sided couple in the center of orbit were Mickey and Momo. It was a beautiful thing. Suddenly something moved beneath Momo's jacket. Something scuttered from her wrist to her elbow, then from her elbow to her shoulder. When she reached back to swat it, her head swiveled toward the ceiling lights above, and she whimpered in pain. They were so blinding. "Do you think they heard me?" Momo asked in a whisper. "Who?" Mickey asked in response, but he wasn't whispering. With her eyebrows raised, Momo tilted her head toward the employees behind the register, who each did their best to ignore the junkies at table 15. Mickey scanned the faces of each of the cashiers. He was meticulous in his diagnostics. "No, I don't think so," he eventually answered, but Momo wasn't satisfied. She too scanned the overworked faces and saw one that Mickey hadn't noticed. It was the long, narrow face of a dimly lit man. He was staring at them through the window of a door just behind the register. The window was eye level, but the man seemed to be crouching, nearly sitting on the floor just to get low enough to see through it. Even then, the ridge of his brow was still concealed by the window's frame. "Do you see that man?" Momo asked, trying to point without drawing attention. Mickey glanced with his peripheral vision. "You think he's a cop?" he asked. When the cashier at the register called out the order for table 15, the two delinquents nearly jumped out of their skin. They grabbed their to-go box, and just as they turned for the nearest exit, Mickey asked the cashier, "Hey, who's that man in the doorway over there?" Momo grabbed him by the collar and pulled him out of the Denny's before the woman at the register had the chance to respond. What? What'd I do wrong?" Mickey had asked this throughout their entire journey across the parking lot and was still squawking the same 3 questions when Momo tossed him into the car. "If there's a cop hanging out in the kitchen and the whole place is probably swamped with rats," Momo finally explained. "Oh shit, you're right. You think she told on us?" "Well, if he didn't know we noticed him before, he certainly knows now." Momo flipped on the headlights and looked out across the parking lot. She saw something. When she did, she slammed on the gas and turned onto the road as fast as she could, leaving a tread mark that's still there today. Mickey hadn't buckled yet, so when the Nissan went flying, so did he. He tumbled across the console and halfway onto Momo, then tumbled back into his own seat and slammed his head against the window. "What the hell was that about?" He grabbed the door for support. "I saw the fucking cop. He was standing outside staring right at us." And she was right, too. Or at least she had every reason to believe she was. She really had seen a figure in the parking lot, and its arms reached past its knees. Driving like Freebird, the two teenage junkies shortly made their way back to the trailer. They were paranoid now. Bugs were crawling across their skin, and the fuzzy parts of their vision were populated by enshadowed figures. "Do you think he followed us?" Mickey asked as Momo locked the doors. "Probably not alone. I'll bet he ran our plates. He'll be using that to get our address, so we should be fine." Since neither of them were over the age of 18, the Nissan's title was under the name of Mickey's mom. She was in jail right now and unlikely to rat her son's address. Momo pulled the curtains shut. "They'll only have our faces to work with," she kept explaining. "What if they go to lose? People know us down there." "Yeah, but no one over there knows where we live." "What about Mrs. Santigo?" "Oh, shit. Mrs. Santigo." Mrs. Santigo was a regular at Lou's Burger and Fry. She was also Mickey and Momo's next-door neighbor. Mickey pulled the curtains open and peered across the shrubbery that separated the two little trailers. He looked through Mrs. Santigo's window and saw her there, standing beside her kitchen sink. She was looking down, filling a glass of water, and when she looked up, her face had stretched out to twice its length. "Holy shit!" Mickey yanked the curtains closed and stumbled backward into the living room. "What? What is it?" They fucking got her. In a matter of seconds, the two of them loaded a go bag with everything they need. They grabbed t-shirts and jeans and socks and belts and needles and enough liquor to start a 1930s turf war. They took cash and canned food and cup of noodles and plastic utensils and a butterfly knife and the Type 92 machine gun that Momo's grandfather had used against the Allies in the Pacific Theater. They took antique ammunition and, of course, the remaining quarter pound of the peanut butter crank, which they smoked a little more of before making their way to the nearest motel. The rented room was small and claustrophobic. The AC wasn't working and the carpeted floor squished like Laffy Taffy. There was no telling which bugs were real and which were in their mind. They were on the second floor. The right of the motel was a long one, full of hideous conversation. First, their mysterious pursuers were cops or DEA. Then they were secret agents. Now they are aliens. That made the most sense to them. How else could the man have been so tall? How else could they have warped the face of poor Mrs. Santigo? The motel furniture had all been pushed against the entrances. The hazelnut dresser was pressed to the door, and the bed frame was propped up against the fire escape. Mickey and Momo were sitting on the mattress, with World War II history aimed toward the dresser. "Why do you think they're after us?" Mickey asked. "Hunting. They're super predators. Trans-dimensional, I bet. Trolling the space between worlds looking for prey. The meth. It changed our frequencies. Made us visible to them. So what do we do?" They smoked more meth, hoping it would help. Hoping it would change their frequencies further and make them unrecognizable. It didn't work. Soon enough, they heard a sound. A sort of gurgling sound. From the bathroom. Shit, why didn't I think of that? What is it? Mickey asked with a voice full of fear. "They're coming up through the pipes. Hurry, we gotta block off the bathroom before it's too late." But it was too late. Before they could even rise to their feet, a strange, translucent blob crawled out from under the bathroom door. It didn't have a face, nor any distinguished limbs. Just a pair of shapeless pseudopods that made a pitter-patter sound as it scurried toward the motel mattress. Momo wasted no time in unleashing a rain of bullets at the alien trespasser. Most of these cut through the carpeted floor and into the rooms below, or spilled out into the hallway. None of them made contact with the blob. With impressive speed, it leapt into the air and latched onto the ceiling above. It scampered around up there just as effortlessly as it did on the ground. If the motel would have had a third floor, then Momo would have sent gunfire towards its inhabitants as well, as she tried in vain to strike the shapeless insectoid. Bullets flew shortly into the sky, having passed the tiled rooftop. The creature fell back down to earth, dropping behind the bed frame, which was still propped against the fire escape. Momo unloaded into the metal frame and the walls surrounding it, with little progress. Mickey ran into the bathroom. Inside, there was a second translucent blob, emerging from the porcelain throne like a cobra from a wicker basket. Quick on his feet, Mickey reached around the hissing body and flushed the toilet, sending it down the drain, followed by a stream of toilet paper as Mickey unspooled a roll into the basin. He packed the paper tightly with his foot, which would have surely been enough to block off entrance in the pipeline, but Mickey went one step further. He flushed it again, clogging the toilet and causing the water to overflow. From there, he tried to turn, but shortly slipped on the newly slick floor. He tried to support himself with the shower curtain, but this didn't work. His back and entire left half were soaked with bathroom tile grime, but the discarded curtain draped across his body did have one benefit. It reminded him of why he had entered the bathroom in the first place. He rose to his feet and lifted the metal curtain rod out from its brackets and ran back into the main room, wielding the alloy rod like a spear. Not much had changed in his time in the bathroom. The monster was still hidden behind the bed frame, and Momo was still filling the adjacent walls with bullets. But the monster had used that time to metamorphosize. Its pseudopods were replaced by bony, bug-like arms covered in quills and flighted feathers. These arms, all 6 of them, were splayed out on either side of the bed frame now. "It's got 6 arms," Mickey said. "It looks like a fucking tick," Momo agreed. It tossed the bed frame to the floor, revealing its face. In a lot of ways, it looked like the man in the parking lot. In a lot of ways, it looked like Mrs. Santigo. Its face was long and narrow, like a mule. Its eyes were bulbous. A thin, glossy slime oozed from the tear ducts. It didn't have a mouth, it had a snout. It almost looked like the nose of a pig or the trunk of an elephant, but where the nostrils should have been, there was a slender beak instead. "What is this thing?" Mickey asked in disgust. "Some kind of elephant bird. Look at its trunk." An ear-splitting squeal rang out from the gills that lined the creature's neck. Momo tried to fire but was out of ammo. Mickey charged the beast with his aluminum staff, but it snapped the staff in two and pinned him to the ground. Its tea kettle scream was now a distorted giggle. Momo fumbled in panic as she filled the magazine. The monster's hands were gaunt and skeletal, like the limbs of a scarab or the feet of a crow, but they felt like the hands of a man, firm and rugged but lined with soft skin. They held Mickey still as he began to struggle, but this only took 5 arms. The 6th was held off to one side. The fingers coalesced into a single point, like a dagger, and plunged deep into Mickey's stomach. The pain was searing. Mickey screamed in anguish, especially when something began to pump from the alien's stinger. It coursed through his body like a rattlesnake's venom. Momo finally loaded the antique firearm and loosed a fury of bullets into the elephant birdman. She was a horrible shot, even when sober, and countless bullets struck the paper-thin walls and carpeted floor mere inches away from Mickey's face or torso. But plenty of shots still reached their intended target. The extra-dimensional villain recoiled from a blend of panic and pain. Its rigid skin melted again into the tenuous blob it had been before, its shoulder especially, until its needle arm had flaked off from the rest of its body like the skin of a leper. The monster abandoned its severed arm, and in its place sprouted a pair of elytra, which it used to hover a few inches above the ground. It hovered for just a moment, then broke free through the window, disappearing into the night sky. Momo pushed past the shattered glass and shot randomly into the aether until her grandfather's gun began to click empty. "What happened?" Mickey screamed, still writhing in pain on the floor. "The elephant bird flew out through the window." "No, what happened to the arm?" "The arm? What arm?" "The alien's arm. It stabbed me with its arm. It fell off when you were shooting it. I think it crawled inside of my body, into my stomach." Momo knelt down on the squishy floor. Mickey's shirt was stained with blood, and there was a quarter-sized hole in the front. She tore the shirt away from his back and scanned his naked torso. There was a small pinprick on his belly, just to the left of his navel. It seemed to be closing up. She picked the butterfly knife out from the filthy carpet and cut a large X into his skin, intersecting the pinprick. Red blood gushed out from the wound as she splayed the edges and pressed her lips against them. She sucked the jagged cut until she felt the gelatinous body of the creature's severed arm. She bit down and reeled back, fishing the writhing worm out from her boyfriend's skin. It was nearly 3 feet long now. It didn't look much like an arm anymore, but there was still a hand-like structure at one end. There was an eye in its palm. The rest looked like a jellied serpent. Momo tossed the parasitic zooid onto the Laffy Taffy floor and in the same motion ran across the room and grabbed the Motel-issued ice bucket. She slammed it over top of the creature and pushed her full body weight against the upturned bottom. "Grab the tequila!" she yelled as the severed arm slammed its body against the sides of the metal can. Mickey obeyed and doused the spongy carpet with alcohol. Momo stepped back from the bucket and tossed her Zippo lighter into the iridescent puddle. A pillar of flame erupted from the floor and the high-pitched squeals of the thrashing serpent could be heard from down the hall. They stared at the growing inferno for some time before Momo glanced down at the empty bottle of booze still held in Mickey's hand. "I thought I said tequila," she said. "Vodka's more flammable." "Yeah, but I don't like tequila." As the rented room filled with poisonous smoke and the fire alarms drowned out the parasitic squeals, the 2 contactees heard a knock at the door. "You think that's the elephant birdman?" Mickey asked in a hushed tone. "No, I don't think the elephant birdman's coming back. I bet it's the Denny's guy. Or Mrs. Santigo." "What should we do?" Momo lifted her Pacific machine gun and fired at the hazelnut dresser blocking the door, but once again the gun clicked empty. "Shit," she said to herself, then turned to face the shattered windows behind them. "We're gonna have to jump." The asphalt outside did not make for a forgiving touchdown, especially not for the antique firearm which shattered at the end of its 2-story fall. Mickey and Momo didn't fare much better, the former of which having caught his leg on some railing while falling past the fire escape. It was broken now. He had to limp back to the Nissan. And of course, once there, he was still bleeding profusely, both from the alien stinger and from Momo's impromptu surgery. The little doodles all across the interior of the car were stained in his blood. Many were stained so horribly that they were left unrecognizable. As they drove to who knows where, they spoke and theorized about what they had just witnessed. They each explained the event in their own words, mentioning details that their contemporary had apparently failed to notice. Mickey spoke of its bug-like arms, of the quills that covered them, and how its hand had become a blade. Momo talked mostly about its face, about its trunk and the pointed beak that protruded from it, about its bulging eyes and the slime that leaked from them. Written above is the sequence of events that Mickey and Momo eventually agreed to be true. Mickey must have fallen unconscious at some point in the drive, because the next thing he remembered was waking up. The air was cold and brisk. He was staring into a blinding light that rested above his head. Something was smeared across his upper lip. When he tried to wipe it away, he found that his reach was caught by something. Handcuffs. They were tethered to a hospital bed. He tried to scan his surroundings, but his vision was blurry. The only thing that came into view was a figure on the other side of the little room. It was writing something onto a clipboard. Mickey called out to the figure. "Mrs. Jean?" he asked with a raspy voice. The figure was June Jean, a nurse at the Eastern New Mexico Medical Center. She was Dillian's mom. "Mrs. Jean, can you get them to take off the handcuffs?" "No, not yet," she said. It wasn't long after when the cops arrived. There were two of them, Detective Roland Foster and Officer Henry Mudd. Henry looked like a goldfish, with chubby cheeks and bulging eyes, but Foster did most of the talking. His arms were long and bony. "What do you remember from last night?" he asked. Not much, I guess," Mickey replied. "Well, that makes sense, considering..." The detective gestured vaguely at Mickey's current state. "But surely you remember your girlfriend in the other room. How she fired a machine gun through the walls, to the floor, and through the ceiling of a crowded motel. She injured 6 people. She shot the manager's dog. She shot you." "What? No, she didn't shoot me." The detective gestured to the white gauze bandages wrapped around Mickey's midsection. "She shot you right there in the belly, then cut you up with a butterfly knife to try and get the bullet out." No. It was the alien that stabbed me in the stomach. And yeah, Momo cut up the wound, but only to suck the worm out." Foster turned toward Mudd. "Well, you saw his piss report. He could have seen anything," Henry explained. "Right." He turned back to Mickey. "Well, lucky for you, your fingerprints weren't found anywhere on that gun. Nor was there any GSR in your hands. Plus, your girlfriend already confessed, so the only thing we have against you is the use of a Schedule II narcotic. But that's still incredibly serious. It could mean 5 years behind bars, maybe longer." Mickey had already begun to zone off. He was fidgeting with the bandages around his stomach. Foster kept talking. "But there is one way you can help yourself. Just give us the name of your dealer, and we'll let you off with a reduced sentence." "Oh yeah," Mickey said and thought for a second. "There was something that he told me to tell you guys." "Who told you to tell us?" "My dealer, Lou Edelman." 17 months later, it was snowing in Roswell. Not much, but it was cold. The sidewalks and lawns of dead grass were bone white from frost. In other news, Mickey Adkins was enjoying his last night on probation. He was sober now, had been sober for some time. He was learning to like it. On the same night, 50 miles away, Momo's hair was getting shaved. There had been a louse infestation on her cell block, and tomorrow would be the first time in 17 months that Mickey would get to see her. He wasn't allowed to before, not on probation, and that's what he thought about as he stared at the onyx sky above him. He thought of how long the last 17 months had been, and how comparatively short the following 127 were sure to be, just because he'd be allowed to see her again. Clouds of white steam bellowed from his mouth. They were so well defined that they would block his vision completely for just a moment, before fading away into nothing as he inhaled. Once, after the cloud had vanished, he noticed something. Something that wasn't there before. A sleek silver body hovering in the sky, just above the horizon. When he exhaled again, another cloud of steam veiled his vision, and when the veil was lifted, the mysterious craft had already disappeared. The encounter lasted all of 15 seconds. Mickey went to bed after that. The actual date is Saturday, the 15th of March, and this is the Other Roswell Incident, also known as Going to Belgium, Richer Than God, or The Thing That Came from Calle Adrador.